Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the VSI Sporting Directors Podcast with our friends at Omnisport. We're changing tack a little bit at the moment. I've got someone with me who's head of sport at Barn Door and JMW, but importantly, isn't a lawyer. He's come up with a 6-point strategy about buying football clubs. We've got tons and tons to talk about. Ben Peppi, welcome to the studio. Welcome back to Manchester. This is where you're from.
It is. Thank you, James.
And you're not a lawyer, are you?
I'm not. I have the fortune of working in a law firm, but not being a lawyer. So I get to see both sides of the fence and get to give a commercial opinion as opposed to just a legal one.
Yeah, I'm married to a lawyer, so I have to be very, really careful what I say. But clearly, she's not here at the moment. So again, I'll stress he's not a lawyer. But you are a Manchester United fan, so I want you wearing different hats. Yeah. I want you wearing the Manchester United fan hat initially. What would your message be to the Glazer family right now? As a fan?
Leave.
Okay.
Very simple.
And I think you're probably in the majority on that. As an advisor, someone who's maybe got to advise them to do the best thing for the club and for themselves, can they get out of this in any way, shape or form without leaving?
Yes, they can, and they can get out of it very profitably by not leaving. So I think what they're doing, if I was advising them commercially, is actually the smartest strategy for them. And that is that they raise a cash injection into the football club. They keep a shareholding within it. They've seen what's happening to sports valuations. They've seen what's happening closer to home in the US. And they realise where sport's going, and they realise that Manchester United could be worth over $10 billion in the course of the next 5 years. So why wouldn't they stay holding on to a piece of the pie if they could do that without actually having the day-to-day influence, even though it's debatable whether they have that anyway, within the football club? Let people operate it, let people run it, and then cash out fully over the course of, as I said, the next kind of 5 to 7 years, where the valuation will be significantly kind of steeper than what it is now, and it's already very steep.
I mean, people have talked about them playing the long game. You're saying they're actually playing a longer game.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think, as I said, I look at the Washington Commanders just selling for kind of over $6 billion and being the largest franchise sale in the US of recent times. And you look at, it's kind of similar actually when you look at United and you look at legacy and history and tradition. And Manchester United has a very fortunate position as to where it sits commercially as a football club. As I said, sport's only going one way, valuations are increasing. We'll talk about, obviously, the Premier League broadcast deal, which obviously plays into that. And the last 10 years, while success hasn't necessarily been there on the pitch in the way they would have liked, that's not stopped.
But does that make United unique in the sense it's not intrinsically linked to success? Or is that something that has to come to an end to a certain extent, because there has to be some success?
Yeah, for sure. I think it will have to come to an end at some point, and they very much were at the fore of the globalization of the Premier League when they were the most successful football club, not just in the UK, but in the world. And they have the most sophisticated commercial team. They have the most sophisticated, I suppose, commercial operation as a football club, which is why they exist where they do, particularly in kind of the global sports kind of market, not just within the UK football market. That will start to shift and it'll start to change, and it already is starting to shift. But they can play on that for now. They continually will play on it. And if they can raise kind of money, they can obviously take on new investment and they can transform their fortunes on pitch. Then off pitch, they will continue to try and engage the kind of the 1.1 billion followers that they claim to have, which is obviously incredibly, it's an incredibly large audience that they believe that they have. But if they can engage just a fraction of that properly, then there's a huge opportunity there.
But there is. I mean, we had Rob and Dan talk at length about it and talk about kind of monetizing the fans, and everyone's into that now. So it's not like a bad word anymore. Everyone knows the deal. Yeah. But you look at the Dallas Cowboys, I think, monetize their fans to $72 per fan, and I think it's 40 cents or something like that with Manchester United.
Yeah,
which just shows the scope there, doesn't it?
Yeah, and that kind of applies to, I think, UK football generally. I think one of the really interesting things about this kind of fan engagement notion is people claim that this younger generation of fan don't like watching live sport. It's just not true. They just need to consume their sport in a different way. And the biggest challenge that any rights holder has, be it a football club or any other rights holder in this country over the next kind of 5 to 10 years, is actually how they engage that younger generation of fan. And that comes down to match day experiences. I go to Old Trafford and I turn up in my seat at 5-3 and I watch the game and I go home at 10-5. Like, that's not going to be what a 10, 11, 12-year-old fan, and obviously a 6-year-old, once they kind of grow older, will want. They need match day fan activation zones. They need to engage with the club digitally. They need to be in the stadium watching highlight clips from other games that are going on, and a whole host of other things. And the beauty of technology now is that you can understand far more about your fans than you ever have been able to. So the reality is that these commercial teams and the digital teams within football clubs, they are gathering more and more data to be able to understand this, that can inform their strategy. So they're going to be able to do it. It's just about who gets it right. And it's a very busy space. In the work that I do, kind of see 3 new fan engagement businesses every week that claim to be revolutionizing modern day sport, and there's obviously a lot of fluff out there, so it's about who gets it right, and people will. And as I alluded to earlier, United have a very sophisticated kind of new business team, new digital media team, and they have the beauty of having the amount of fans across the world that they do. But engaging a fan in Asia is very different to engaging a fan locally in the UK.
But if you're sat in that seat at Old Trafford, you want to make sure you're dry and that it's not raining on top of you when there are holes in the roof. And that's like a metaphor and a reality.
Yeah, for sure. You would think that would be a prerequisite.
It's incredible though, isn't it?
Yeah, and absolutely. I mean, I've been going to Old Trafford since I was 4 years old, and actually, if I think about it, very little has actually changed there. I've obviously seen quadrants being filled in. I've seen a third tier being put on the old North Stand and things like that, but actually very little has changed. And you look, and I, in my former life of going all around the country to football matches and stadiums, and I look very close to home at the Etihad campus, and I look at the operation that exists there and how great that is, or I look at Spurs' training ground, or I look at the redevelopment of other stadiums in this country. United's nowhere near that.
And yet you say that, and I'm not a Manchester United fan, but I've spent a lot of time working there, clearly, and it's not a day goes past where someone doesn't want to talk about Manchester United with me. You walk into that place and it is still special. It still feels like a special place to be. I know there's an element of come and look at the big old stadium, but it is hallowed ground. I don't know how long that lasts, that feeling.
Yeah, and I mean, Thomas Tuchel said in his press conference last night that Man United has an aura, and whether that's him touting himself for a job in the summer, who knows?
Very clever, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, I as a fan love hearing that kind of stuff. Now, I do genuinely still believe that. I've worked in the industry for over 10 years to know that United does still hold and carry weight, and as you know, obviously working in the media, that Man United is big news, and you look at, I even compare it now to Chelsea, and I look at Chelsea's underperformance over the course of 2023 and everything that's gone on there, and the lack of kind of media narrative around that relative to what's happening at United. And you look at what happened in Klopp's first couple of years at Liverpool, and Arteta at Arsenal, and all this kind of stuff, and it always feels like it's bigger with United. And as I said, that's all timing. That's a case of they were there when the Premier League kind of started. They were the successful team through the 90s and early 2000s, and it's because of the iterations. I think it's because they've gone again. And you look at that team in 2007 to 2013, obviously that was supremely successful. Obviously there was the kind of the treble team, there was the team before that, so there's almost been like 3 generations of kind of side that fall into that. And then obviously you've got the history and the legacy, and I think by their very nature, Manchester United and Liverpool are kind of the fabric of football in this country when you talk about tradition and community and all of that kind of good stuff as well. So, but that can only last for so long. The world is moving on very quickly, and all of that stuff that I think has even been important to like a generation like mine will not be as important, sadly, for generations to come. And that's where the clubs know that they need to move on.
But one thing that stumps me, and this isn't a Manchester United podcast, so if you are watching and you're not a Manchester United fan, we're going to move on in a minute. But I want to ask you this, because no one seems to come up with an answer that I'm content with in that way. You work with JMW, some of the best sporting lawyers in the country, so the people who put that team together make sure they get the best people, because what it gets you is the best results, the best reputation, and makes the people at the top of the chain look good.
Yeah.
So why don't people at Manchester United do that? Commercially, they do, but why haven't you got the best people in doing the best jobs throughout that football club?
I think 2 answers. I think one, the Glazers, and I think Gary Neville's argument is absolutely correct that it does stem from the top down in any institution. Now, obviously, on-pitch performance is relative to kind of players and all of that kind of stuff, and I have a serious gripe with modern-day footballers and what comes with that and a whole lot of other things around that. And I think the second one is that football clubs, yes, United are very innovative and forward-thinking, but actually in a lot of ways, there's a lot of dinosaurs at football clubs, and they're very bureaucratic, and it's very difficult they have all the best intentions of doing a lot of the stuff that they need to do, but actually when push comes to shove, they don't do it. And riding the crest of a wave is very easy, but actually when it requires board approval on decision making and all of this kind of stuff, actually, if you've not got the people there with the best intentions of running a whole football operation, and running a whole football operation is not necessarily just commercial revenue, just media revenue, just the best new fan engagement platform. It's everything from the top down. You're running an institution, right? And it's why certain managers haven't succeeded at United, because they've wanted to manage a football club, not an institution, and you have to manage an institution. And it's the same on the flip side from a board level and from a commercial level, that actually you're not just running a commercial operation, which is what actually a lot of United's executives would be are very good at, but actually you need to get the football bit as well. And I think that the challenge is they've not actually managed to combine and amalgamate the two successfully in the same way that you saw obviously under Sir Alex and David Gill, and obviously previous periods before that as well.
And you wonder whether a sporting director actually might be the solution, or one of the solutions here.
Yeah, and obviously that's the kind of talk around Ineos and Sir Jim Ratcliffe and what they all bring to the club. But you question again with the Glazers kind of still being there, what is that going to look like? And we don't know what that's going to look like in terms of board decision making, in terms of approval processes. What are the kind of the execs at Ineos going to be able to do? I mean, there's talk that they are going to get free reign over the football operations of the club. Now, TBC, right? And it's talking about a £250 million kind of infrastructure commitment. It's not even going to touch the sides.
Yeah, with the greatest respect, when you talked about Sir David Brailsford and marginal gains, Manchester United players can't wear pointy hats and clingy clothes.
Yeah, correct.
There's a bit more to it than that, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
It smacks a little bit of Sir Clive Woodward going to Southampton, doesn't it?
Yeah, and as you rightly say, and you look at their track record in football, and it leaves a little to be desired currently. Now, that's not necessarily obviously going to be the case in a few years' time, but and I'm sure there are grander plans, and we'll talk about different types, obviously, of football club ownership and what that looks like from a group kind of holding perspective. But the reality is that football's very cyclical, and things can also change very quickly. So if they do get it right, with the momentum, with everything that will come with the good feeling, and I alluded earlier around modern day footballers, and I think when they're riding crest of a wave that everything's great and they're happy, but when the chips are down, that's when you kind of see the reality. And the sad reality with United's on-pitch performance is that when the chips have been down, you haven't had those leaders in the dressing room that have kind of said, right, well, we batten down the hatches and we actually work hard, and not we kind of down tools, which has possibly been the case objectively with certain players. So, yeah, I think that speak around marginal gains and that speak around high performance and all of this kind of stuff, every sport and every football club and every player is entirely different. And whether it be the CEO, whether it be the sporting director, whether it be the manager, it all has to just flow as a process. And that's what's been missing at United.
Part of sitting in that chair is talking about your journey as well. You talked about having a gripe with footballers. Does that gripe mean that you're sitting there being head of sport with some lawyers rather than being a football agent as you were?
Yeah, I mean, so I work with footballers daily, and there's a lot of great people out there in kind of that world. I just look at it kind of more objectively as a market. And yeah, I saw kind of the trials and tribulations of the football agency world back when the industry was kind of regulated and licensed.
Did 3 years, didn't you?
Yeah, just a little bit more, but it was regulated, it was licensed, and it was kind of a pleasant place to be. And the market changed in 2015 when FIFA decided that they wanted to deregulate the whole industry, and all the other 93% of people that kind of failed the previous agents exam suddenly just became agents and what was known as registered intermediaries. And that wasn't necessarily the problem. It was just the problem that stemmed from that was that the advice that started getting given to players was from people that weren't being able to professionally advise them in the right way. And I come at it obviously from the professional advisor side of the fence, so it's very different. Now, I won't necessarily relate to a footballer in the same way that certain very successful ex-pros who are football agents do incredibly successfully, and there was many at the company that I worked at. But at the same time, you then started to have dads and cousins, kind of dad and girlfriends, mum and everything else, looking after players and advising them, not necessarily always with the best intentions. And what then flowed from there was this kind of world of terrible advice in this saturated market that just became a complete free-for-all, which then meant ages to start getting into. Players got younger and younger, and all of a sudden you had 14-year-old footballers with agents throwing themselves at them, with all sorts being offered to them. And I never actually blame the players. So what I alluded to earlier, I never actually blame the players for sometimes why they are the way that they are. And I think there's so many things that can be done around education and community and network and advice for young pros to get them to the point. If you look at NFL players as an example, they go, and I'm not saying I think every footballer needs to go to college as an example, but they come through a system where they have to play college sport, basically. So they get an education, they start to engage in a network and a community. Footballers in this country are just so close to everything. It's not their fault. It's just the nature of the sport and academies and how they operate. And it's starting to shift a bit. But there's just, as I said, I've seen the great, the good and the bad. And there is some kind of bad advice out there. Thankfully, there's new regulation coming in. Obviously, we know that the leading agents in this country have taken a case to court against certain new regulations that are anti-competitive, with caps on commissions and all this kind of stuff.
What's your view on that? Is the regulation heading in the right direction or the wrong direction?
So I think the initial regulation, I think there was some good stuff, and there was some stuff that rightly was challenged. And I think the agents have every right to look at the caps on commissions and things like that as anti-competitive, because one of the things that opened my eyes to the market when I was in that world was actually how influential and important agents are for the good, as well as obviously they get a bad rep in terms of certain conflicts of interest and things like that, which I understand. But actually what a lot of people don't realize is that club CEOs, club sporting directors rely on intermediaries way more than anyone actually thinks. And that's because they have a stronger hold on the market and an understanding and the ability to negotiate. Like if you look at any industry, you have people in a sales function and a commercial function who are negotiating deals. And yes, that might be the job of a good CEO, but actually there are other people in that food chain that are negotiating these transactions. And for football clubs, that often is agents who are very good at what they do. And a lot of the old guard of registered intermediaries and agents are ex-professional services. They're ex-accountants, they're ex-lawyers. Back when I got licensed, you could either be a licensed agent or you would need a registered kind of solicitor with the FA to sign off on deals and close those. So that type of kind of professional understanding of not just, I suppose, who's paying me the most, but actually what that deal should look like. And there's so many nuances to a player's contract, especially at the Premier League level, that mean you do need kind of professional advice around it. So
the problem here is self-interest on all sides, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
From FIFA, from UEFA, from the agents, everybody wants their slice of the pie,
yeah.
And everyone's pretending they don't.
Yeah, and I think the intention behind when FIFA first deregulated 8 years ago was that they felt the bigger agents had too much of a monopoly, and all that happened then was that in any industry, the biggest companies are still going to have the monopoly, right? But you open out the market and two things will happen. What happened in the football agency world, that it just became completely saturated with all the wrong people, which is not what you want. Or you want to spread the competitive balance. But that was starting to happen anyway. Whereas now, all that's actually happened is there's just been a huge amount of M&A work and kind of amalgamation of these bigger agencies going on. So CAA, a huge US sports and entertainment agency, bought Base, where I used to work. ICM, huge US entertainment agency, bought Stella. CAA and ICM are merging. Obviously, we know of other kind of M&A transactions going on in the market currently, where these bigger conglomerates, these bigger agencies are acquiring these smaller agencies because they realize that that's who they need to be to compete. So actually everything that FIFA hoped would happen, you will always get some independent agents that are very good and very successful, but the reason it became so attractive is because the money to be made in football is so vast and so significant that, as you say, a lot of self-interest. There were agents that actually only needed to do 2 or 3 deals a year for the right player and the right talent to actually make a very kind of healthy amount of money. And those agents just purely looked at football as commodities in the same way you'd look at a stock as a commodity. You acquire it, you trade it on a market at a profit, and then you sell it on. And that's basically as simple as it was for a lot of intermediaries.
So let's talk about buying football clubs. So the trend at the moment, whether it's Manchester United or Brentford, is selling a slice. Now, it appears to me that the owners are playing that longer game because they see the broadcast deals, they see the value there, but they also want maybe a little bit of liquidity and they want some know-how. Am I kind of pointing in the right directions here?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the most important. So if you look at Brentford as obviously a kind of a lower value example,
so we're not talking about United all the time as well.
Still a Premier League example. You look at a club like that and where they've come from, what they've done incredibly well. They've obviously been run very successfully with their own model. So they've obviously had that kind of Moneyball approach around data and everything else that came with that, which is brilliant. They've got a new stadium. They're located in a great location in London. So they've obviously kind of had their foundation building blocks. They've got to the Premier League. They've cemented themselves as a Premier League football club now. And the timing is absolutely right. So what the owner, as a good custodian of I look at a deal like Brentford currently as actually a only positive, because you look at the owner and as a good custodian of that football club, that owner will know that he doesn't have the source of kind of funds to enable Brentford to kind of continue to compete at the level they are.
Without Brighton, he says, controversially, because they hate each other.
But also with Brighton, I mean, the Brighton have been incredibly successful, obviously, in the transfer market, as everyone knows. Number one, that's not going to last forever. And number two, you can't hinge your whole club strategy on just player trading. And no club obviously will, with the amount of revenue that comes in from the broadcast kind of income. But that's where they obviously turn a significant profit. Now, that's risky because you get it wrong for 3 years and all of a sudden you're sat on a pool of talent on significant wages that you can't shift on necessarily, or that don't necessarily perform very well over the course of a couple of years. And then you run the risk of, if you relied your kind of whole business model from an investment perspective on that player trading strategy, then you're not going to have very happy investors. So I look at the Brentford example and gone, they've been incredibly successful to get to where they've got to. They now have a custodian of the football club who realizes that they need a significant kind of capital injection into that club to enable them to continue to compete with the way that the Premier League is moving, the way that, as I alluded to earlier, the way that kind of sport is going. Without that capital injection, without that money, they won't be able to continue to compete necessarily, because yes, they might sell Ivan Toney for a significant amount of money in January or in the summer. They obviously have other promising players coming through, so they'll realise that. So I think the timing is very opportune. There obviously will be an element of the owner having been there for a period of time and wanting to cash out on that, and why not? He's more than entitled to do that. But we've obviously seen this huge influx of the private equity era in sport and the kind of the foreign ownership kind of groups coming in. And I think it's sensible. And I think as long as you get the right, I use the word custodian because that's what these people should be for their football clubs. If you get the right investors with the right intentions, and don't get me wrong, they'll be on their own cycle. So you look at private equity cycles, it's kind of 7 to 10 year strategies that you invest, you continue to invest. Americans are very brave when it comes to their investing. They're aggressive. They will kind of commit to doing what they say they're going to do, but they will have a very clear strategy of when they want to get out.
Yeah, I think as an Ipswich Town fan, I'm aware of that. We're sort of two years into our 10-year plan, and hoping they don't pull the plug, because they are investing. We're going in the right direction, but you don't want someone saying stop.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's the danger, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I was actually with the Ipswich owner last week, so we had an interesting conversation about that, and they're a great example. So you look at kind of the success.
It's nice to hear that, by the way.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
People haven't said that for 20 years.
Yeah, no, and obviously when that group came into Ipswich, they did not expect them to be sat second in the Championship within a couple of seasons, obviously coming up from League One, and then all of a sudden having a very, very strong chance, remarkably, to get into the Premier League. And Kieran McKenna from the Man United school, obviously doing a great job. But there are some huge clubs in the Championship, and the Championship is very different in the sense of what American owners love about UK football is the jeopardy that's involved. So when you look at, obviously, American sports, there's no relegation. There's a lot of similarities in the sense of these franchises, the NFL and the NFL, the NBA, in the same way that football clubs here are the kind of fabrics of their community, right? And in the Premier League, they're global brands, NFL, global brands, huge media rights deals, etc. But there's actually ample opportunity to grow investments in a very different way when you acquire a UK football club in the Championship than when you acquire a franchise in the NFL or the NBA, but just by the very nature of the sport and what that sport represents and how it operates, basically. And you're seeing with the MLS, where the Americans have been smart with the MLS is that they've shifted what they've done. So they've looked at the consumers, they've looked at what they wanted, they've expanded the league, they have expanded kind of the playoff process, so that means that there's more games in the playoff process, which increases kind of that jeopardy feeling of people being more entertained. They've obviously got the Apple MLS Season Pass, which I think is like $99 to watch every game in the MLS. So that's where they've kind of moved, I suppose, with fan sentiment, which is obviously very different to the Premier League, but the Premier League don't need to do that because they can kind of sit pretty, and they're starting to shift, which is great. So the new broadcast deal, there's obviously more live games than there ever has been. It'll be very interesting to see how that kind of product is marketed and packaged.
It's funny you should say that, because when we first sat down and chatted about doing this, that was about 3 or 4 months ago, and I have to say, with my hand on my heart, I thought we were talking about the ownership of clubs in League One and League Two, because no one wants to sell a Championship club, and Premier League clubs aren't easy to buy.
Yeah.
Does the broadcast deal change all that, bearing in mind the kind of rewards that are on? We're talking world records. We've not even gone into the international market in terms of their next deal.
Yeah. I mean, so if you have to look at it from the lens of the investor, I suppose. So if you look at a private equity investor, they're looking at kind of the recurring revenue streams that are coming into football clubs. Football clubs have 3 main kind of revenue streams, basically. They have their kind of broadcast income, they have their commercial income, and they have their match day income. And as we've seen, obviously, broadcast income with regards to the latest kind of Premier League deal, it's over a 4-year cycle. And what that represents is obviously stability. So when these investors are coming in, they know that income is going to be generated over the course of the next 4 years, and they know what that's going to look like. They know that in the market, the Premier League still carries the demand that everyone kind of believed it did, but now they kind of know. And stability to a traditional institutional investor is great, right? Commercially, we've talked about, obviously, there's kind of 2 angles, I suppose, to the commercial income within a football club, and it's very much dependent on the size of the club. They have their sponsorships and their partnerships, which every football club will do, and then dependent on size of the club, all the things we talk around fan engagement and ability to kind of engage your new generation of fan and the rise of new technology and all the stuff that's kind of coming through from an innovation perspective. Clubs can now start to generate more commercial income than they ever have. And then match day obviously will depend on kind of traditional sources of revenue, so people attending the game and F&B and a whole load of other stuff. But what's interesting about that is we're sadly seeing more and more, and obviously relating it to Rob and Dan's kind of podcast, we're starting to see far more clubs obviously generating huge losses and all of this kind of stuff. And when you look at stability around incomes, when football clubs are signing players, as an example, they're not just kind of transferring £100 million on the day of the transfer to the kind of the selling club. It doesn't work like that. They take on debt.
To Manchester United.
Yeah, correct. And they take on debt, and they have various kind of liabilities that they put on certain kind of business functions within the club. And having the kind of steady revenue streams that they do means that they're able to do that because they can secure loans and they can secure debt against kind of future income and all of that kind of stuff with regards to broadcast income and things like that, which doesn't sound good to a fan necessarily, but the way that these clubs have to operate under very strict kind of regulations around obviously only spending what they generate and all this kind of stuff means that they can be run professionally, and hopefully smartly from a financial standpoint. But that requires obviously good kind of people and good custodians doing that. So to kind of loop it back to, I suppose, the question around the kind of the broadcast deal and the attractiveness of these clubs, the international market is, again, it's you kind of saw the rise of like Asia as an example with regards to Premier League viewing in the kind of the 90s and 2000s, and now obviously seeing a huge influx of kind of Premier League kind of viewership in the Gulf and obviously those territories. The US hosting the World Cup in 2026, soccer in the US is only going to kind of continue to increase from both a participation standpoint, but also from a viewership standpoint. And the reality is that the quality of the product on the pitch over there is not anywhere near what it is in the Premier League, even though Messi is there and everything that comes with that. It's going to mean that more people want to start watching the Premier League. And we obviously know that Comcast owns Sky and everything else that, again, it's all interlinked. And all of this stuff is what investors, when they're looking to acquire a football club, will look at from a deeper like market analysis. And all of the direction of travel is positive when it comes to this stuff financially.
What I love about your kind of 6-point plan is it's logical, it makes sense, it's simple in the sense that I can understand it. It goes from identification number 1 to number 6, closure, and you own the football club. Is it easy to apply those 6 principles to every owner, or when you've got things like emotion, you've got impatience, and you've got people with a lot of money?
Yeah, no, it's not, and that's why the very first kind of step when we get approached by potential kind of acquirers of a football club or people saying that they want to buy a football club is why. And it's a case of actually finding out what their intention is behind wanting to buy that football club, because having a local businessman want to acquire his local football club or her local football club because they've been very successful in business or in any other industry doesn't necessarily translate to a private equity investor who wants to go and invest a minority stake or majority stake into a Premier League or a Championship football club or another for a very different purpose. Or if you're Wrexham, you're acquiring a football club to turn it into a media business, right? So everyone has a different intention. And I think where with the people that we've worked with over the years, we've started to understand, kind of lift the veil on actually understanding what that intention is.
I was going to say, has your radar improved to the sense that, hang on, you're wasting our time?
Yeah, absolutely. You can tell.
All the way through.
Yeah, you can tell very quickly. And it doesn't, like, if someone comes to us with having no idea as to actually what the process looks like, that's absolutely no problem. That's why we're there to hold their hand to do it. But it's very easy to spot someone who's just looked at Ryan Reynolds, Rob McElhenney, looked at what's going on with celebrities investing into Formula One teams and all of this kind of stuff, to be like, hey, it'd be cool to buy a football club just because it means that I can tell my mates down the pub that I've acquired a football club. And that's why we as professional services advisors, be it lawyers, be it sports commercial advisors, be it investment bankers, be it accountants, whoever it might be, actually have a duty of care rather than just be a traditional kind of transaction house where, okay, great, someone wants to acquire a football club, we're going to do everything that we can to do it, and then we're going to get a deal and we're going to get paid. Actually, you have a duty of care by working in the industry to make sure that the people coming in are good people. And you're not always going to get it right, but the reality is you could go through that whole process and get to the owners and directors test not having done your due diligence. And obviously this is where working in a law firm is obviously very helpful, because of our kind of KYC and our due diligence kind of processes that come in place for any kind of client matter, but particularly anything that's kind of high profile, high risk, etc. Well, we have to kind of get under the bonnet of all that stuff, because if we know that if someone isn't going to necessarily pass an owners and directors test or isn't going to stand up when they actually go and look to acquire a football club, there's kind of no point getting involved at the start.
So does that mean that there's no such thing, as a perfect owner, because that comes down to the identity of the owner themselves and the club they look at? I mean, you'd say in hindsight that Man City's owners are perfect owners, and you'd probably say that Newcastle owners are perfect owners in the sense that they're going to give you everything. They're going to make your dreams come true.
Yes, but are they necessarily the best owners from a talk about duty of care, right? And talk about duty of care to the sport. And I know this is kind of sounding very optimistic around the obviously the influence that certain people are going to be able to have in the market, but the reality is that you can look at it from two lenses. Either one, sport is going that way, and you look at obviously the Qatari bid for Man United as an example, and it's a case of saying, obviously, if you're Man United, having someone write off all the debt in the club and basically giving an enormous cash injection to be able to go and do all this great stuff is great from an on-pitch perspective. But actually, we talk around all the things that have come up over the course of the last few years with the World Cup in Qatar, obviously with Saudi, and the links to Newcastle, also the indirect links, obviously, to Chelsea. We look at Man City as a kind of now slightly more legacy example. And obviously, in conjunction with that, everything that's kind of currently happening with regards to the 115 charges, then no, it's not the best thing for the football club. And that could be proven true, right? It could be if City get charged and on however many of the charges that they kind of get found to be guilty on, then actually, what does that mean for the project? And what does that mean for everything that they've done? So over the course of time, I think it's not just the short term, but it's kind of the long term as to where that goes. But the challenge with that is that the reality of where football is, there's only so many kind of sovereign states or institutions that can actually afford to pay the sums that are needed for these football clubs. And you're not going to go to Russia anymore. You're not going to go to China. So where do you go? You go to America, or you kind of go to the Gulf, or you go to a very, very wealthy kind of, I suppose, local billionaires, right? But there's not many of those that actually, one, either are billionaires, or two, have any desire to acquire a football club.
But my worry is that fewer people care about the foibles, and more people care about what you said, the on-the-pitch stuff.
And that's the reality.
Morally, we're not heading in a great direction, I don't think.
No, we're not. And I completely agree. I completely agree. And people have very short memories. I think the interesting thing and the interesting kind of thing to look at from a wider sports perspective is there was all this great narrative a couple of years ago and prior to that. I remember in Euro 2020 when Ronaldo removed that Coca-Cola bottle from his press conference, and Paul Pogba removed the Heineken bottle and all that stuff, and everyone was saying athletes are far more savvy to their own personal brand now. They are far more vested in their own interests and promote their own ethical, social, kind of moral standpoint, which I think is brilliant. However, you can do all of that, and it takes one decision to go to Saudi, or if you're John Rahm, to go and sign with Liv when you said that you weren't going to do it, or any other sport that kind of just chases the money. And the sad reality of sport and the sad reality of kind of life really is that everyone has a price.
It's show me the money, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And everyone has a price. Everyone's price is different, but everyone has a price.
So what do you make of the arms race with the Saudis? We talk about John Rahm there. You talk about their vision for 2030, likely to get the World Cup in maybe 2034. Yeah. All roads seem to point there, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. There's no question about it. And it's not good for the sport. I think in terms of the monopoly. So I think that I'm all for disruption. I think a lot of sports need to be disrupted in the right way. I think I know that I'm all for kind of the sport going into new markets. We know that the Saudi population is very young. We know that they have a passion for football. So I've got no qualms about any of that stuff, and I have no problem with sport going into those territories. And there are smart people running the operations in Saudi. So it's not just a case of they have all this money, they're going to chuck a load of money at all these people, these rights holders.
It's not China 2.0,
no,
is it?
Absolutely not. They have an incredibly clear strategy, number one, and that points to their Vision 2030, points to the hosting of the World Cup, and everything that comes with that. You have to appreciate that a lot of their executives are people that are more westernized than obviously kind of their elders as such. They've all been to American universities, they've all been to UK universities doing kind of MBAs and all this kind of stuff. So they become more westernized to culture, to kind of our principles and all this kind of stuff. So they can talk a very good game, but they can actually back that up with enormous amount of wealth, which obviously makes their life far easier. So I don't think that they're going to necessarily get the product wrong. And I don't think that actually the money that they spend might actually be beneficial to certain sports. Like golf is a good example of talking about how to engage this new generation of fan. Well, do you go down the team sport route? Do you have a different format and so on? So that I don't mind any of that, and I think all that's good. The bit I have an issue with is that when you look at the Saudi Pro League signing the players that they did in the last transfer market, if you're offering players 1.5, 2 times their salary, there's a potential argument there that you are signing them for the right reasons. When you're signing players on 10 times their money who are over 30, whose hamstrings don't work anymore and who've got terrible injury records over the course of the last 2 years, there's very little kind of ground that you can stand on to say, actually, we're doing this for all, literally correct, exactly, that you're doing this for all the right reasons. And I also think what a lot of people miss when they think about this stuff is that the Saudis are incredibly powerful on a global basis now, and the people that run the country, you kind of do as they say. So when you're being paid the amount of money that you are, be it if you're John Rahm, be it if you're Cristiano Ronaldo, be it if you're any other player playing there, you're still at kind of the beck and call of what
you're their property.
What you're being told to do. You don't have free reign in the same way that you would in a kind of a Western kind of civilization, Western democracy.
Is that going to bear itself out in the fact that people are going to down tools and maybe go somewhere else when they can't tolerate it anymore, or is it not going to get to that level?
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of soft power there that we just don't see. So I think commercially, in terms of what people have to say in the media, there's a very polished narrative when it comes to the Saudis, and a kind of a very polished and good narrative. I was at Leaders whenever it was a month or two ago, and a number of the headline kind of panel events were people from the Saudi Ministry of Sport, and they all spoke incredibly well on what the vision is and youth participation and more girls getting into football, and all great stuff, and all stuff that I think is incredibly valuable. But I just think that sometimes I actually think they're the product of their own downfall because of the amount of money that they have and the ability to just spend stupid sums of money on some of the things that they're doing. There is no way that you can pay John Rahm $600 million as reported and see a commercial return from that, in terms of, if you're running a football club, you have to spend within your means because there's regulation. The fact that there's no necessary regulation in some of the sports that they're investing into means that they can they've got free reign to do what they want.
It also seems to me, and I think I suggested this to you earlier, that, Cristiano Ronaldo, Leo Messi in the MLS, they need to be playing to their 50s because we haven't got another GOAT coming, have we, at the moment?
Yeah, and we spoke about this, didn't we? That I think going back to that kind of piece around the new generation of fan, the kind of the new consumer, they follow players, they don't necessarily follow the teams that they play for. So people like Ronaldo, people like Messi, Neymar, etc., wherever they go, that's where these kind of kids follow, and that's whose shirt they buy, and the kind of the lack of, I suppose, tribalism that kind of we grew up in that the team you support from the day you're born is the team you support on the day you die, and that's going to be a problem. So that's why you're obviously seeing this shift in kind of narrative of like the globalization of kind of sport and the new markets. And as I said, I don't have a problem with that. I think that the Premier League has done that, and UK football clubs have done that. We've acquired the best talent for a long time from territories obviously closer to home, be it in Europe or from further afield. So we can't just suddenly claim that other kind of markets can't do that. I just think that the strategy as to how they do it and the way that they've gone about it is not necessarily completely correct. And obviously it doesn't help with all the other things that are there in the background as well.
I want to try and cling on to some moral fibre in the game. So when you pick up a call to somebody who wants to buy a football club, is there anyone who says that I want to do it for the goodness of my heart because they're my team? Or is it, what's the bottom line? How can I turn this round? How can I flip it?
So my experience is we've definitely had sellers of football clubs who have done that and sold for the right reasons, because they've realised that as talking about the Brentford example, not that's one of ours, but that's a great example, I think, of a custodian of a football club going, well, if I want this club to continue to get to where it needs to get to, then it's going to need an injection of, if you're a League Two football club, it might be 15 or 20 million pounds over the course of the next 3 years that some local business people can't do. And with that, so that's my experience, but there will absolutely be acquirers out there with this kind of the same intention. There will always be anyone who wants to acquire a football club it's like any transaction, right? No one's going to acquire a football club to lose money. But the reality is that if you acquire a football club, the reality is that you are going to lose money. And there's a very strong possibility that you're not going to make the return that you think you're going to make. And there is absolutely that kind of self-interest piece around owning a football club and what comes with that. But there's kind of more money out there now, and there's different sources of income out there, and there's different sources of wealth out there, as you're seeing. And everyone looks to obviously to the Wrexham example. You don't need to see the Wrexham kind of project as a football project. It's very much it's a media business, and they've turned that into an incredibly successful media business with everything that they've done, generated more sponsorship, more and a whole load of other things, and obviously got their documentary and so on. So everyone has their own reason for buying a club, and there absolutely are those people with just pure self-interest to say, I want to do it, but you would have to be very, very silly to align the self-interest with actually just deciding that you're going to buy it and knowing that you're going to lose capital.
The other natural suspicion or thing that you draw out of broadcast agreements is that most of that money will go and find its way into players' wages. Now we're looking already at people being paid £500,000 a week.
Yeah.
Is that going to now explode, and are we going to have £1 million players in terms of what they're taking home every week? Is that just a reality that's going to happen in the Premier League?
Possibly. I mean, so
people can't put a break on this, can they?
No, I mean,
except go and play somewhere else where you can earn more, perhaps.
Yeah, and as we said earlier, everyone does have a price. I think that at some point, and this is the problem kind of with the Saudi numbers, is that the disparity between being a £150,000 a week player in the Premier League versus a £400,000 player in Saudi, where does that disparity need to get to for that player to decide, actually, I don't care about the quality of the product, and I don't care about being in the UK and everything that comes with that, but actually I want to go to Saudi. And one of the things that a lot of people don't talk about is kind of the cultural impact of a lot of Muslim players, as an example, going out to Saudi and it actually being very important for familial lifestyle and all of that kind of thing. But that's very different to another person just deciding that they want to go move to China tomorrow because they're getting paid an enormous sum of money, right? So there's so many factors that feed into it, and obviously financial, sadly, being the most important. In terms of the broadcast deal and how that relates to Premier League salary, so it didn't actually rise in line with inflation even. So it rose, I think, 4%.
I'm feeling sorry for them now, suddenly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, likewise. So in terms of where I think Premier League salaries are going to go, that they'll continue to increase in line with obviously stability of the broadcast income. It's over a longer period. It's over 4 years, not 3 years. So that's kind of, I suppose, good from a player perspective. But it's everything else that comes with that. And football is actually quite simple, that you draw attention to the product through eyeballs, which means you grow media rights, and then it's a funnel, right? So the more money you earn from media rights means the more money that comes into the clubs, which means the more money that they can spend on players, which then means more money back to agents and other stakeholders in the game. But without the media rights income, then the sport has a challenge as to how it grows revenue at a rate where it can keep up essentially with salaries. And that's the difference with Saudi, that they don't have huge domestic and international media rights income like the Premier League does. And it's not sustainable in itself at the moment. It's just they're being backed by incredible sources of wealth. So because there's no regulation in line with what they're able to spend and what they're able to earn, they can just basically just go. I mean, the top four clubs are all owned by the same entity, right? So that's not great from a competitive standpoint. So the Premier League is different. And
it's the never bursting bubble, isn't it?
Yeah, it would seem so. And I don't know when that bubble does burst. I think the nature of football in the country is obviously it's very socially cohesive, and you're never going to take that kind of element away. And that's why people in this country, obviously, as I talked earlier, I talk about fabric of community and all that stuff. People love their football team, right? People don't care about that internationally. So then it goes to quality of kind of product, and what is that quality of the product on pitch? We've obviously seen many results over the years of so-called lesser teams beating top sides and so on. And that's why people do love the Premier League, because it has that kind of jeopardy. It has it almost has this, talk about aura earlier, it almost has this aura. And in the same way that when does Man United kind of lose its aura, when does like the Premier League lose its aura? If all the best players suddenly went, like how does that translate into kind of media and broadcast income? For a long time, obviously Serie A had the best players in the 90s. You think about the El Clasicos with Ronaldo and Messi in the late 2000s, early 2010s. It didn't actually matter necessarily for the Premier League because they still had the quality of the on-pitch product outside of the big two or whatever it might have been.
Rob Wilson sat where you're sitting and was worried about the growth of the women's game in this country. It's all heading in the right directions.
Yeah.
Lionesses might win a World Cup, which would be fantastic. But, you talked about the revenue thing there. The revenues are up 600%. Costs are up 1,300%. That isn't sustainable, no matter what the moral high ground is on men and women being paid the same wages. You can't keep cutting the cake and giving people the same slice, can you?
No, absolutely not. And I think I alluded to there, like the importance of like growing media rights in terms of ensuring that a sport becomes
more sustainable, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. And the only way that you grow media rights is by growing kind of audience and awareness. And I think the beauty about the women's game is that the awareness and the audience is on a hugely positive upward growth trajectory. I think if we're being honest with ourselves, the product now from where it was 10 years ago is like, it's incredible, even from where it was a year ago. So we know that the product is only going to get even better. But right now, the quality of the product is good. It's not great. And what that good means is that there are a huge amount of eyeballs on it, which is brilliant. And obviously England hosting, winning the Euros and all that kind of stuff was absolutely brilliant for the country. And by the very nature of the sport becoming more professionalized, obviously the product is going to get better because the players that used to exist weren't in it, like female academies. They weren't professionals even, right? Whereas now they're getting quality training and they're going through the academy process and the facilities are better and all of that great stuff, which then means, as I said, you ride the wave of obviously talk about engaging audiences. Like you go to Man City's women's team and you have a great match day experience there. And then if you want to, they host the game at 1:00 and then you can go over to the Etihad and watch the Premier League game in the men's team at 3 or whatever it might be. So it's about how you package it together. It's about how you ride the wave of the on-pitch product being better, which means that more people are going to watch it, which means more people are then going to turn up to stadiums and you make that experience better, which then means that media rights owners and sponsors and everyone else will want to get involved. And there's obviously the big debate around FIFA and the kind of the sale process around the TV rights for the Women's World Cup and all kind of this stuff. The reality is like there are very commercial people running these operations, right? And they need to see eyeballs in order to kind of pay the sums that they want to pay, but also that the rights holders want to be paid. So I think it's all flowing in the right direction, and it's only going to get better. And I watch women's football matches now, and you're not just kind of astounded by the kind of the improvement and the quality level, but also like the kind of the tactics and the way that the game is played. It's so stark from what it was kind of 5 years ago, and that's only going to increase. And what that will mean for the women's game is that I talk about funnels earlier, everything from kind of youth participation, more girls getting involved in football at a much younger age. It's all hugely positive, and hopefully will only continue at the same kind of rate that it's going at.
I want to just finish off with one of my particular frustrations, which I think links all the ownership models that you've kind of talked about, is the lack of accountability. It doesn't matter whether you're one of the Glazers, whether you're Sheikh Mansour, whether you're one of the Saudis at Newcastle, no one's asking you any questions. You're not doing interviews. You're not accountable. You're not visible. But I guess that's what you sign up to when you're an owner of a Premier League club. It's almost that guarantee that you don't have to be accountable, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's wrong. It is wrong. And it's funny because sometimes I feel sorry for managers and other times I also don't, because I have the same belief that if you become a manager of one of those football clubs, you also know that you have a duty to speak about that stuff. And it's sadly very easy. And obviously, you know this far better than me, James, but it's very easy for an Eddie Howe or another manager to kind of come out and say, well, that's not my area. I don't know too much about that. I think it's complete nonsense because they absolutely know about this stuff. And managers are often well-educated people that keep up to date with current affairs that they can't be missing. So I definitely think it's wrong that the owners hide behind the kind of the veil of their manager and the spokesperson for the club. But I also think managers actually have a duty to do that stuff as well.
Does that maybe open the door for a sporting director model like in Germany? We've spoken to a couple of people already on the podcast this year who do all those things. They are that kind of face of the owner, or at least the fabric of the club that you've talked about.
Yeah, and I think that these owners, they're very quick to be seen at, I mean, some owners, not all, very quick to be seen at games. And yes, it's obviously not their job, unless you're a publicly listed company, as an example, where you obviously have certain regulations and certain things that you need to do by the way that you run your company in the public domain as such, then it's very easy for football clubs, as you say, to kind of hide behind this, hide behind the boardroom door as such, without coming out and speaking about it. And there might be room for that, but is it the job of a sporting director to do that? Because by the very nature of a sporting director, that is the sport, that's the on-pitch kind of product, I suppose. As opposed to being a kind of spokesperson for the kind of the ownership group. And I think one of the reasons for exactly the point that we're discussing is actually that what the fans and what the media and obviously other people want to hear when these questions are asked and kind of no one answers them, it's got actually nothing to do with the football club. It's just everything to do with be it politics, be it kind of economics, whatever else. And I suppose there's an argument to suggest, do these owners actually need to talk about this stuff? In my view, absolutely. I think it's kind of mission critical, because by the very nature of who they are, it represents kind of the clubs that they own. And obviously you saw everything that happened with Abramovich. As soon as kind of the conflict started, look what that meant for that football club, right? So I think that they have a duty to do it, but I just don't see it changing anytime soon. And it unfortunately is very easy for them to hide behind it. And I get why they do it. And there is an, as I said, there is an argument to suggest that they don't have to talk about a lot of the stuff that they're being asked about. But I also strongly believe that no manager, you wouldn't walk into a line of work knowing what you know about the company that you go to work for without just having a responsibility to kind of talk about that, especially if you're obviously in the public domain and you're a manager of a Premier League football club.
And I guess crystal ball gazing, and this is the final question, when you look at the conglomerates that have kind of merged, if you like, in the agency world, when you look at the multi-ownership groups in football, they're just going to become more and more prevalent, aren't they? And just bigger and bigger and bigger as time moves on. I mean, it's gone at a pace that's surprised UEFA, it's surprised FIFA. Yeah. And now you've got competition questions being asked all over the place.
Yeah, but I'd much prefer a multi-club ownership model run by seasoned executives in sport than a sovereign wealth fund by my football club, right? So if you look at Arctos, I think just invested into PSG, got a great reputation, got a very good understanding of sport. You look at obviously like Redbird and Fenway and Liverpool and AC Milan and City Football Group and all the others that kind of exist. And that's the type, we talked earlier about kind of the competitive balance, and the only way, the reality is the reason that these ownership models exist and the reason that this kind of activity is happening is because it's the only sources of wealth that is kind of at the level where they can actually compete alongside, be it billionaires or sovereign wealth funds, etc. And they raise institutional capital from big banks, and it's, whilst it might be kind of leveraged in some way, it's very operationally functional. That's the type of ownership group and the ownership model that will compete with sovereign wealth funds and others, but in a good way. And I see that, I don't see that as a negative, because I think that they will, not all of them, obviously we've seen recent examples of some kind of negative attention around certain like ownership groups and so on, but they're the types of investment groups with experience both on the sports side but on the finance side that, don't get me wrong, will be there for a capital return 100%, but actually will also kind of have the right experience to lead a sports project in the right way.
That's brilliant. Ben, thank you very much. It's been fascinating, enlightening.
It's been great.
It's been a great journey. Thank you very much. If you're looking to buy a football club, give Ben a ring. If you're watching or listening to the VSI Sporting Directors podcast with our friends at Omnisport, carry on watching and look out for the latest episode coming soon.